pleasure to have you be here. I've known you for a long time. I heard you say earlier today you've been in the lithium ion batteries business for 40 years.
Yeah, at least since about 1970.
Right, and I know you're a longtime member of the Electrochemical Society, and I've known you a long time. I don't think 40 years, but a long time, and so it's really a pleasure for you to come and share with us some things about your work and your life, your interests, and let's start with how you got your interest. Take us back to the early life where people influenced you, or things that maybe influenced you to start thinking about science.
Sure. Well, I went to what we call a public school. It was really what we call a direct grant school in Britain. So this is a school that's a private school, but where the state paid for me to go. So you had the advantage of both systems. Because in my town there was no equivalent of a high school. So there we had an outstanding science education. So I had a Major Lamb, ex-military, who taught chemistry. He loved it and he passed on that love of it. And similarly in physics there was Dr. Bowman, who also ran the yacht club. And he just got everybody imbued and hooked them on science. And we did experiments beyond what you do in sophomore year in college in the States. So
Good combination.
So once hooked, no, they've got you.
Little sailing, a little science, right?
Yes. Yes.
And so you got hooked, and so moving forward on your education, it was Oxford, and so I assume
Yes.
their influences and the work you got started, you were looking at Oxford to take a little bit further?
Yes, so when at Stanford they say apply to Oxford, so I did, and you had to spend 3 or 4 days there being interviewed, taking exams, and New College there accepted me, and I should emphasize new was new when they built it in about 1400. So I went there, and at Oxford you study just chemistry, so no other disciplines. And what's different in Oxford, it's a 4-year course, whereas normally in Britain it's 3 years, and the 4th year is totally research. And I did research in inorganic chemistry department, but inorganic chemistry there was over 1/3 it was solid state chemistry. And what we now call material science was part of the inorganic chemistry.
That's the connection, yes.
So Hume Rothery, who every metallurgist knows, had an office next to mine, and he taught me my metallurgy as part of inorganic chemistry.
At Oxford?
At Oxford, yes.
And so you made that connection to material science,
Yes.
and I assume that led you to Stanford.
Yes and no. What led me to Stanford was sunshine. I had a job offer from ICI in England, and I said, if I can get a postdoc at Stanford where it's sunny, I'm going to go to California for a couple of years. And I knew of Bob Huggins, because another student from Oxford had gone to Stanford. So I wrote to him and said, how about me coming? And almost by reply, the answer was yes.
So what was Bob Huggins doing that made Stanford, besides the sunshine? He must have been doing something that...
Yeah, well, he was in, I didn't really know much about, he was doing really what I would call solid state chemistry, defects in solids. He'd worked with Carl Wagner in Germany, so doing a lot of defect studies. He was had some interest, beginning interest in ion transporter. But the year before I went to Stanford, the Ford Motor Company announced they'd discovered beta alumina had high transport properties. So when I went to Stanford, that's what I worked on, trying to understand it and actually measure those materials.
You have some interesting connections to some of the great scientists, Carl Wagner,
Right.
to Bob Huggins. Carl Wagner, of course, we have an award named after him.
Yes.
Were there other people at Stanford, fellow students, other faculty?
Mostly I worked with Bob. I worked with him for maybe 3 months. Then he left to go to Washington to head up the materials centers in the Department of Defense. So I basically took over his group for the next 2 and a bit years. We had a lot of interesting characters in the group because some of them were entrepreneurs. They would have a startup company, it may go bust, and they came back. I'll pick up my PhD where it left off. Michel Amand was a graduate student there. And those were the glory days of research. You didn't necessarily go begging to agencies to fund you, they came to you. So I think we had the EPA and NASA fighting over us. We want to give you money, we want to give you money. And so
when did they stop fighting to give you money?
I don't know, because I wasn't begging for money after I left Stanford, but times certainly changed in the next 10 or so years. But those were good times. You could do good research, and we did a lot of studies on beta alumina and really made the key discovery there. To measure beta alumina, we needed what we call a mixed conductor, which was vanadium oxides or tungsten oxides, where we could intercalate lithium in and out. So they were reversible electrodes.
So your experience, the timing of it, the people, was very enabling for the things that you started to do next.
Yes, it was almost perfect timing.
Yeah.
So we published the initial data on the beta alumina in the Electrochemical Society Journal. And that's what got me the Young Author Award. I think it was 71 or 72.
That's right, that's right.
And I now look back at the people who've got that award, and there's lots of big names there. And I still remember that award mostly for when I received it. I think Norman Hackerman must have been president of the society. And the meeting was in the Shamrock Hotel. I think, is that in Houston maybe, or in Texas somewhere?
I'm not sure.
Anyway, he carried a lot of clout because he had the Texas Rangers come in at the reception on their horses around the pool.
Oh, you're kidding.
And then the dinner was a black tie dinner.
Wow.
Very, very formal in those days. I remember all of that.
Wondering if anything maybe specific happened as a result of that recognition?
No, because I had by the time I got it, I think that my next job was in hand, as it were.
And that job, was it a dream job? Is that
Well, certainly afterwards it was. I think at the time I was at Stanford, and Exxon decided they wanted to have corporate labs. Bell Labs decided they wanted to build up some of their solid-state chemistry expertise. So they both approached Ted Jabal at Stanford and said, we need people. So I think about 5 of us went from Stanford either to Bell Labs or to Exxon. And the two labs are about 20 miles apart. And I lived halfway in between them.
And so that was 1972, according to my notes.
72 when I started there,
right.
yes.
And so I didn't quite get, so Exxon came to Stanford, and what were they looking for specifically?
What Exxon wanted to do is they wanted to diversify into energy broadly. So the charter we had was you can work on anything energy related, provided it's not petroleum or not chemicals.
Oh, okay.
So they built up groups, and my group head was a guy called Fred Gamble. And the group had an organic chemist, me as a kind of materials person, 2 physicists, and he was really a straight chemist. So they built up interdisciplinary groups, and our job was to look at new materials and how could we use them in energy. And he'd been studying superconductivity and how intercalation can change the transition temperature.
So this was a corporate research model that seems to have all but disappeared.
Yes.
And so they created, how long did that last at Exxon?
Quite a long time, because I was a scientist and a group head and a lab director there. And then Exxon's way of doing things, if you can manage things you know about, then we switched to something you don't know about. And I moved to be division manager of chemical engineering, which is in Florham Park, which people may now recognize as where the New York Jets training center is. They bought that from Exxon. So the corporate lab, it lasted, I would say, about 8, 9 years in its then status. Then Ed David, who had been at Bell Labs, came to be CEO of Exxon Research and Engineering Company, and he decided Exxon should be the Bell Labs of the energy industry. And he got the okay to double the size of the labs.
Wow.
But that created problems. One, there's a lot of money. But the Exxon corporate labs cost maybe $40 million, $40 million a year before that.
Mm-hmm.
After he did that, it was about $60 million. And on Exxon's annual financial sheet, beforehand it got rounded off to nothing. Afterwards it got rounded off to 100 million. So it suddenly became very visible. And there was, I think, some bitterness because here was the basic science getting a lot of funding,
Right.
and the engineers weren't doing so well. So when I was running the chemical engineering division was the whole synthetic fuels.
Oh, right.
So I was responsible for looking at shale processing, coal liquefaction, coal gasification for about 2 years, and then that all came crumbling down. And Exxon had a severe cutback, and it hit the corporate labs particularly hard at that time. And I think that's when they started refocusing. GE had got rid of their corporate labs, DuPont had gone, IBM had gone. They all
Bell
went about,
Laboratories.
yeah, everything went about the same time, so the model just changed.
Right. How long were you at Exxon?
I was there 12 years, and I went, after about less than 1 year, I went to one of their kind of training sessions. Now, here's the energy future. And they were then predicting that gasoline or oil production was going to peak within 10 years. So that's why they wanted to get into alternative
Right.
systems. But within a year after that, you then had the 73 embargo. And by then, Exxon already decided they wanted to build electric vehicles. So they then set up this corporation called Exxon Enterprises. So they got in the battery business after we made the discovery on TiS2 and intercalation. So they called me into their headquarters in New York to a subcommittee of the board and said, tell us what you discovered. And I explained it in 5 or 10 minutes. Within a week, they'd say, okay, we're going into the battery business. And those days, they drill wells, maybe 10% make money. And the people at that time took the same risk with research. We're going to bet on some areas, and maybe they'll make it, and maybe they won't. But Exxon became the largest producer of solar photovoltaics in the US. We're planted in Massachusetts.
Right. I remember. Yep.
And they ran all the nuclear reprocessing out in Richmond, Washington. And they had chip facility, and I think that's the only one that made money. And they were in they were in all sorts of strange things. But no, they took the battery technology, built a whole development team, engineering team, built a battery manufacturing plant out in Bridgewater.
So you're the key figure in the development of lithium ion battery. Just can you talk a little bit about how you got there?
Well, what I was looking at these superconducting materials and trying to intercalate different ions inside them, and we found out we could put potassium inside a layer of material called tantalum disulfide, just by immersing the crystals in a water solution of potassium hydroxide. Potassium went in, which immediately told us it was obviously a very stable compound. It didn't evolve hydrogen. So we said, there's something there. We started measuring voltages, found, hey, there's 2 volts in this thing. So we then rapidly moved from tantalum to titanium, which is the lightest transition metal. The team there started measuring all the properties. It turns out titanium disulfide is a metallic conductor. So we didn't have to mix it with carbon or anything else. So we then started building cells, and it went step by step after that.
You said they called you in and said, tell us a little bit more about this. Did you see the possibilities for the lithium ion battery?
We saw some of them because I said at the time Exxon was saying we need electric vehicles. And so lead acid wasn't really the way to go. And if you actually look at US Department of Energy, they started the electric vehicle program whilst this embargo was going on. And with Chrysler, GE and others, and they were talking about using lead acid. So we said that's not the way to go, so we started looking at lithium. The manager of that program was Bob Hamlin, And he decided we should go small cells first. Now get our feet wet, alpha test or beta test the small cells before we got into larger cells. But we did have cells, I don't remember what the amp hours were, they were 6 inches by 4 inches by an inch thick. There was a big EV show in Chicago, and they took all their cells there, drove them there.
Oh, is that right?
And it switched a motorcycle headlamp on and off all week long. So they were very serious at that time. A lot of companies working in the business at that time.
Other applications that were being talked about?
Mostly electric vehicles.
Really?
Yes. And there was also interest now in watches and things, because there were not good LCD displays, so they used LEDs. And your battery would last a few weeks. So they wanted a rechargeable watch. And Exxon was selling, they made small button cells which they sold to some Swiss companies to put into their watches.
I think it's obvious the benefit of an electric vehicle to society, but I'd like to get actually your comments on that. How I don't know, there's just the influence on making the world better by using this kind of battery power.
Well, clearly it's cleaner. It's not so polluting. You don't have to cook your exhaust systems like VW did. You got a pure electric vehicle, everything comes out. Comes out fine. So I'm a advocate of electric vehicles. I don't think a pure electric vehicle is the way the US is going to go eventually, because of just range anxiety. No, the US is a big country. If the battery will only take you 50 miles, you're going to be panicking by the time you've driven 30 miles, is it going to run out? So I think the way GM's gone with the Volt, and the way BMW is going with that little i3, where you have a little gasoline engine in there as well, which can keep you going to the next gas station.
A combination.
So PHEV is probably the right approach. And you can save 30% of fuel if you stuck a battery in every car we have today and got the regenerative braking. So I suspect within 10 years that every single vehicle is going to be hybrid of one sort or another.
Right. This discussion stoked a thought that now that I've heard twice this week, once in a podcast that you were involved with, once with during Adam Heller's lecture. There's it seems a lot of pessimism that if we were to have all renewable energy, we're still not going to solve. We're not going to solve the problem we need to.
No, I think it's unrealistic, because renewable energy is the only, shall we say, renewable energy that works 24 hours a day is hydro. And I know the province of Quebec is what 90% of electricity comes from hydro. We get a lot in New York State from hydro, and it comes from Niagara. But wind blows mostly early morning, the sun is mostly in the middle of the day. You've got to spread it out some way or another. And I think the first thing you do is conserve.
That's a good transition to talk about your work now, your affiliation, and so why don't you share some of the things that are going on now?
Let me go back a few years. When I went to Binghamton, I went to a standard chemistry department. But they wanted a materials person on the faculty. And just like Cornell, Penn, every campus decided materials chemistry, solid state chemistry really existed. Before then, there were no such people in chemistry departments. So all of us from industry suddenly disappeared. From about, I would say, the early 80s to the early 90s, they all shifted to academia.
I know.
And I walked in the door and I was told, oh, by the way, you're going to lead an Institute for Materials Research. And it went very well, and I was supposed to be the token faculty member there. I think half the faculty in our department now do materials research of one sort or another, as opposed to liquid or gas research.
Now, I think there were some other electrochemists from ECS at Binghamton. Were there other people that I might know?
People like Nick Dimitrov, who does plating studies. We have people, Lewis Piper, who does a lot of spectroscopy using the National Lab. He's here. Wagner and Joe does a lot of transmission electron microscopy, all working on battery or battery-related type materials.
Mm-hmm. And how long were you at Binghamton?
I've been at Binghamton since '88.
Mm-hmm.
I plan to stay there for 5 years.
Okay. Well.
So a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So since I've been there, the materials chemistry activity was so successful that we actually started a brand new program at the doctorate level
Mm-hmm.
in materials science and engineering. And that has about 40 PhD students now.
When did you start it?
10 years ago,
Oh.
10, 12 years ago.
And I mean, another aspect of what you do is your involvement with the energy hubs. And so
Right.
talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I've got involved in that area in about, was it 2007? When DOE had these study groups in all the different energy areas, and I was a lead of part of the energy storage activity.
Mm-hmm.
And we wrote the big report on that. And then about a year later came out the request for proposals for the Energy Frontier Research Centers.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no intention of leading one. So our leader was Claire Gray at Stony Brook, and I was one of the associate directors, and Glenn Amatucci at Rutgers was the other one. And we won it. And we started there 2009.
Yeah.
A year later, Claire Gray started shifting her activities to Cambridge in England. And in 2011, I took over as director of that centre.
Mm-hmm.
And moved some of my time actually over to Stony Brook, away from Binghamton.
Mm-hmm. What are you trying to accomplish through this through the next funding cycle?
On the fundamental basis, our goal is to understand every single reaction that occurs in a battery material,
Mm-hmm.
in the actual material itself, in the full cell, and what really happens to the material. Because people think in a battery, lithium ions move. Well, everything else moves as well. So the transition metal ions move, and we try to understand that. If we can understand that, then we hope to get much higher capacity. Today's batteries are extremely inefficient.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're looking at it on a volumetric basis, you get between 11 and 16, 17% of the theoretical capacity, that's all. So part of our new goal is to study the existing battery electrodes, the layered oxides, the lithium cobalt oxide and that type of material. But another whole thrust is aimed at looking at increasing capacity substantially by putting 2 electrons into the material rather than 1. We think that's a pragmatic approach to take, as opposed to J. Caesar,
Mm-hmm.
George Crabtree's hub,
Right.
where he's trying to put 1 magnesium in. Because we have an anode, we have an electrolyte, we just have to worry about the cathode. He has to
Mm-hmm.
worry about all 3 components. And we feel lithium can diffuse much
Mm-hmm.
faster than magnesium. And we've got 1 or 2 materials that seem to be working very well.
Excellent. You were kind of alluding to, obviously, increased capacity. And
Yeah.
anything else that can be accomplished through the things that you just talked about?
Well, obviously, no. We'll understand exactly what's going on. It's the goal. We understand every chemical reaction, the good ones, the bad ones, and the ones that don't really matter very much.
Mm-hmm.
We can then hopefully design the next batch of materials. And we're doing this by having about 1/3 of our people are theorists. So they help guide the experimentalists where they're going to go. And they look at the results we get and say, do those make sense or not?
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, the goal is if we get all this data, then the theorists maybe can then predict the next material.
Mm-hmm.
Then we will try to make it.
It sounds like, at some level, they're recreating this corporate model. They're enabling.
Yes.
Yes.
So the EFRC's doing is really rebuilding the model we had at Exxon, to some extent, what they had at Bell Labs,
Mm-hmm.
where you get interdisciplinary teams together.
Right.
They work well together,
Right.
and you accomplish far more than if you have a chemist working by himself, a physicist working by themselves.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a vision of the things that you think you can accomplish through these improvements?
Well, we're hoping to hit the absolute limits of, say, all the materials we're working on are cathode materials,
Mm-hmm.
and they all react by intercalation.
Mm-hmm.
So we're restricting ourselves to that because we think that's where you can get the most cycles, because really doing chemical reaction every time. So we want to maintain the structure. We think we should be able to get close to doubling the storage of today's batteries, and hopefully at far lower cost.
That's pretty impressive.
So I think we have a good chance of doing that, because really most people have flown by the seat of their pants. They haven't really understood what's going on, and they're surprised, because at Exxon we knew every detail about those materials we were using.
You've been doing it for 40 years. You sound as enthusiastic as you just started doing this work. Must be very exciting for you.
Oh, it is. No, this is the most exciting time. There's so much going on right now.
Yeah.
You know, we sowed the seed back in the 70s.
Right.
And now really the tree is growing, and it's growing
right.
fast.
You sowed the seed, and now you see it to fruition. And,
yes.
Yeah.
It's great. Yes.
Yeah, congratulations. You really,
Thank you.
You know, as we all know, you're the key player behind this, and it sounds like some phenomenal things are still yet to come. The tree is almost grown.
Yes.
Because you've been such a long-time member of ECS, and you've done so many different things, as you know, as symposium organizer, author, young author award winner, and so on and so forth. I don't know. It would be interesting to hear about your relationship with ECS and how you think ECS possibly helped you in your career, or what we can do in general
right.
to help scientists.
Well, I think in my early days things were much easier. Now I would come to the ECS meetings. You'd have your battery division, and you'd know everybody in the field. Mm. The groups was far smaller, and you met at the meeting, so you knew what Joe at the other company was doing, and so on. Mm-hmm. And you could exchange information. So things were easy then. We could work as teams, competitively, because when we got in this business, we were competing head-on with Bell Labs. It's a matter of who published first. Mm-hmm. And I think ECS really enabled that. Today this in battery business, there's 1,000,001 people in the business. It's much more difficult. I don't really remember having many parallel sessions in the old days.
Right.
You may have had two. So the two organizers would get together to make sure the subject matter was different, and it's just not that way. So I think the challenge today is for ECS is to put out good meetings, very good journals that everybody has access to. Right. Because the real issue today is still, you publish something and you still get these emails from third world countries, we can't get your article, please send it to us. Mm-hmm. And I think ECS could help itself and the community by somehow finding a way of going total open access.
Well, that's our plan.
Yes.
And I'm confident that we'll accomplish that. I think it's you just described. Fundamentally, what it means. So if we're here and our mission is to disseminate the content, the knowledge, to advance the science, what better way can we do it to take it away from these paywalls that protect information? And I think also, I've obviously, drank the Kool-Aid about, the importance of being able to have freely accessible information in these important fields. Yes. It's connected to the sustainability issues of the planet, because advancements can happen at a higher pace. There's just a greater opportunity if we can share the innovations, on the pages of our journals. So.
And you don't charge $5,000 to publish an open access article.
No.
Which some of the others do, and if yours are all total open access, I think you'll get the top quality papers that will start coming to the journal.
Yeah, we hope that is an attractive feature, and I couldn't agree with you more about the article process charges. That almost feels like a shell game of, well, we'll remove subscriptions, but now we're going to charge the author, and it comes out of the grant one side of it or another, to create the access. It just, and that's money that could be used directly for the research as opposed to having to pay for it. So do you think the society through this can have some influence on the sustainability issues? And there are other things that we can do? Electrochemistry has such a powerful influence in so many areas.
Yes. I think the question is yes, and you have to do it. You have to get involved in all these areas. You have to have perhaps more impact in Washington, because a lot of the issue is how do we educate the staffers on the Hill. I don't think you'll ever get to the congressmen and the senators themselves, but really educate them. Some of them are extremely smart. So I remember going there, talking to one of my staffers, my local congressman, who's since retired, and we started talking about things. He said, but what are you going to do about all the cobalt in the batteries? And I was kind of open up, what, he understands what's going on.
Really?
So they have interest, but I don't know whether you can have a congressional day where you say, here's what's important about electrochemistry. It's behind corrosion, it's behind essentially everything in energy when you think about it.
It absolutely is, and again, I keep saying this. You know, you've been involved in the organization a long time. This is a new role for us, but right. I think I agree with you. I think it's a role that we have to play. How else can we share the importance? We have to be advocates for the science, for the people that are doing work in it.
Yes.
And so actually, this exchange with you is part of that. We're trying to capture the thoughts of some of the most influential scientists and capture their work in a way that we can share it back out. So and we're doing that very publicly now. But I think these are tools. So we're working on it.
Good. And the other thing, like about ECS, you respect your elder members. You're loyal. If I'm loyal to ECS, you're loyal back. And I get now free membership, 3 attendance at the meetings. I don't know of any other society that does that.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say that. I mean, I think there is a certain sense of loyalty. It's the culture of the organization. But I also think that we're smart enough to know that your participation with us is very important. For you to be here as one of the leading scientists in our field, and so we appreciate that you want to continue to be loyal and contribute to our journals and contribute to our meetings, and so I want to thank you for that. Before we get to the end of this, and I forget to do that too. And as we are getting close to the end, I feel like I've been grilling you with a lot of questions, and we covered a lot of ground, but we should maybe end this with more of a freelance and just give you an opportunity to share some final thoughts about anything at all.
No, I think we have to look after the planet, as it were, for our children and our grandchildren. So we have to move the technology forward, but not by using more energy, but by using less energy, and not by messing up the environment. And as electrochemists, we can do that, and we've got to do it.
You're right, and all I can say is thanks for your input in all of this, and for the great work that you've done that helps with the very issue you just described. So thanks, Dan.
Thank you.